Shauna Wilson is president of Amazon Consulting, Inc. She consults in performance management, audits to multiple quality standards, and provides online certification preparation training for the discipline of quality. Wilson's an IRCA certified quality management systems auditor and a leading expert for the past decade for eAuditing and auditing global supply chain. She holds a master's degree in performance management technologies. Shauna, take it away.
All right. Today what we're here to do is we're here to define eAuditing and the driving forces. Also, what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring in the changes that the context of organization is bringing on as a result of the new release of the ISO 9001-2015. Then we'll get into the 5 steps of getting started with virtual auditing, and also review some of the benefits that eAuditing provides to those that are using this methodology. So before we get started, I'd like to ask the question, does the audit method used matter? Should the auditing method replicate the auditors or the auditees' working environment? Is there a better way to find the evidence, especially when we're looking at online records in a virtual setting or the hard copy records in the face-to-face? Will the method that's used sometimes prevent the audit from occurring? So these are all areas that we need to understand and ask ourselves. We'll come back to this question later on in the webinar. But first, let's define what eAuditing is, because a lot of people don't understand the full extent of what an eAudit is. So J.P. Russell, who's the guru of auditing, he has put out this definition for regular site audits, which has been around for a very long time. And that is, the audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent of which the audit criteria can be filled or are fulfilled. Now, an e-audit is the same. The e-audit will answer to that same definition, with the exception that it's using electronic means to remotely obtain the audit evidence in order to determine the extent of the conformity of the audit criteria. So when we take a look at an e-audit, it's going to have the same elements of the face-to-face. You're going to have an audit plan. You're going to be able to do interviews. You're going to be able to observe the process. You're going to verify. You're going to analyze the data that you've gotten, and you're going to write a report from those results. So there is the only difference between the face-to-face and the e-audit is the electronic aspect in collecting the data. Let's look at it a different way here, and using the tool of is not, because I still find a lot of confusion between what it is and what it is not. All right, so it is simultaneous. Right? It's not something that you're just looking at with an email path or trail, or you're digging in through the client's file system, but you are actually interviewing the auditee at the same time as you are reviewing records, just like you would in a face-to-face interview. You're using cameras, you're using computer systems, you're using mobile devices, you're using all of these technologies to seek out and find the evidence, the objective evidence, just as you would be asking somebody on a face-to-face audit to show you the same kinds of things that you would be observing. It is a system assessment, including record control procedures and a process review. So it has all of the same elements. And the auditee has full control of their computer system at all times throughout the audit, just as they would if they were face-to-face with the auditor. Now, what this is not is a desk audit where the auditor is just looking at a group of records that's been emailed to them. It's not that. And it's not an unintended auditor reviewing a remote location's files unattended. It's not that either. Some of the driving forces and gotta give it some credit here for training us on the technology and becoming a little more independent, is the ATMs that we are now all, going to instead of the face-to-face bank, or I guess we do that on occasion. Working from home, many people shop online rather than going to the local store anymore. So the driving forces behind of that is because of the efficiencies that companies are finding and replacing some of the costs that were, from travel. They're saving that money and adding it into efficiencies and bringing it back and putting it back into the company. As I said, some of the online services that we're now associated with, we've been doing this for over 20 years now. And the other two areas is the core competency supply chains. I mean, if you don't do this as a regular core competency of your company, you're outsourcing that element to come in and provide that core competency from that other group, right? You're stronger as a team as a result of that. And then, of course, the growing telemarket workforce, working from home, or, this way, the new workforce that's desiring to work from home, they can live in the place that they want, around the families that they want, and still work for the company they want that maybe be 2 or 3 time zones away without having to move there. So these are all driving forces, and they still are prevalent in our society and ever expanding. This drawing, or this display of historical advances of technology over the years, back in '71 when email was first started. What's so amazing to me when I look at this slide here is that we've had this smartphone that you can do conference calls on for 5 years now. For 5 years, we've been able to meet online with videos on our smartphones. And, that's just really changed the way that we communicate. Instead of in, places like airports or places like that, you see people talking to one another. They're not talking just on the phone. They're FaceTiming one another and looking at one another as they talk. So it's really changed the dynamic in how we communicate virtually, with the one-on-one conversations that we have with our families, with our business partners. So technology is taking us into this group, and right now technology is there as it's all there that we need to be able to do these audits online. So some of the barriers that we're experiencing with e-auditing, first one is with some of the accreditation bodies and regulatory bodies that just are saying no to this, that audits can't be validated, are a huge barrier for this. I was really surprised with some of the conferences that I've been attending and hearing back from the audience that people are experiencing from the registrars that for their internal audits, they're not accepting their e-audits that they're doing, their online audits that they're doing, because they are a remote company, just a company, and their internal audits aren't counting there. So I think this is pretty random. I don't hear it all the time, but there is a definite barrier there. When a certification or accreditation body is saying no to the internal audits as being a valid means of verifying their overall processes, then they're not going to use that because they need to have systematic audits to pass their regulatory and certification audits. So this is a big barrier for many companies. The other one is within the company itself, and that is that if the company culture is so intertwined with face-to-face, and that if it's got remote locations, and that its core belief system is that it needs to travel to that remote location to build trust and resolve complex issues, then it's going to it's going to be hindered as far as being able to conduct virtual audits, only because it doesn't know how to use technology and the virtual collaboration programs that we have to both build trust and resolve complex problems, which you can do both of those now virtually. There are plenty of examples since we've been in this now for 20 years with virtual teams, and we've been meeting people online, virtually. There's so many marriages that have resulted from these other kinds of websites and that, and I'm not saying that's perfect, but what I am saying is building trust can happen online, and in a business environment, it definitely can happen online. And some of the tools that you have at your fingertips to help resolve issues probably are more effective and more efficient, essentially, than if you were to meet face-to-face in many aspects. The other one is the insufficient auditor training and experience. This is where the auditors, and really speaking to registration auditors here, with the fact that they've been on the road all these years traveling to these different locations, and this virtual environment where people are working virtually has really passed them up. I mean, it's so invisible that, it's just really, it's happened so fast, so quickly, and they were just kind of outside the realm of that. And so they've not had an opportunity to practice with the technology other than just joining webinars in a passive stance as far as listening to people talk, and or else doing emails or downloading into databases, but not any real-time back and forth collaborative problem solving using the technology. So that's another barrier with those auditors. Now, if we have a desire to keep the audits boots on the ground, I put together a self-fulfilling prophecy systems tool here, and I'd like to just kind of run through this briefly to kind of show how this is working. Because I have several people come up to me at the different conferences that I speak at, and they're always talking about, oh yeah, I just don't think this is going to work. So they're in this cycle right here, not acceptance and by an authority figure. So that would be an accreditation or certification body, and they sustain the belief that and questions the validity of eAuditing practices. But what happens is, well, life happens, especially in these virtual environments. And I had a registration auditor come and tell me, he says, no, this just doesn't work. And especially the way that, we did this. And he explained the way that he did that, because he just finally broke down and says, well, I've got to finish this audit. I'm up against this problem here. And I guess we're just going to have to do this virtually, right? And so he tries it out virtually. And he says, boy, that just did not work. They just created a folder of the records they wanted me to see, and I, that's what I looked at, was what they chose. I didn't get to choose. And as he explained his method to me, I thought, yeah, I would agree with you. That is a really horrible way to audit virtually, right? And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right, you just go out and try it without training and any kind of experience in the virtual arena, then you're going to have this self-fulfilling prophecy that, it's going to measure to this. It's not going to be accepted, and the validity of the audit records probably aren't, because the process wasn't used, right? It was just well, let's just do it. Let's just try it out. But if you went in and you started working with the technology so that you would feel more at ease with the technology, so to have training in facilitating virtual meetings, right, and then get better at facilitating these virtual meetings, go around this to where you're feeling good about this, you know how to get people to respond to you, and you're able to figure out how to deal with things without having to be looking at somebody's facial expression and all of that, you start learning and think, okay, I can work through this and I can replace some of those things with other things, okay? Then you go in and you get your training on how to do e-audits and monitoring. So you can join a few e-auditing methods and you know, try it out, obtaining some of the evidence, and you know, even try it on some place that you've been there before, face to face, and see, and you can compare to see if it's as good or maybe better at some point, or if it's worse, you know, that might not be a place that you want to do virtual. So if you switch that ground and then start training and experiencing that, then your outcome is going to be very different than if it's just tried at a time of need. So the increasing of training and experience is going to change this self-fulfilling prophecy that's going to be inadequate and not validated, and the disbelief about e-auditing. So let's go into this a little bit more. I mentioned earlier that virtual teams have been around for 20 years now. 20 years. Boy, that went fast. And this is what they're saying about technology and matching it to the level of problem solving. All right, so let's just walk through this first matrix, and it gives us the degree of collaboration that you should be able to use in a virtual meeting now. And so what they're saying here, for simple and low impact items, email and team bulletin boards are mostly used for conversations going back and forth. And then for high collaboration, the instant messaging, so that's more, you know, that response is quickly. You know, you text a question, you get an answer immediately. And then a teleconference. So a teleconference, when I think about teleconference, it's just over the phone, you know, with many people online with you or on the phone with you. You don't have a visual other than maybe you're looking at the same copy that everybody else is, and you're hoping that you're on the same page as everybody else, because that really is hard to define that unless somebody's saying, no, on page 1, 2, and 3. But anyway, this is what they're saying. For simple conversations, this is the low technology, this is the high technology to be using for high-end conversations. Now, if we go into the complex conversations and collaboration, then it's just going to be over here into the video. So now we've added the visual, because most people are visual learners, the video conference and the collaborative software, which means you're able to share documents, you're able to edit things on the fly, you're able to show flow charts, you're able to do problem solving with maybe some math and some spreadsheets and that type of analysis in a shared desktop capacity. Everybody gets to see the same thing, and you can all talk about it at the same time, right? So that's pretty cool. So this is the levels of technology that we have, and this is what they're saying. Now, if we bring this into the task level, and here are the tasks for that simple, the email and the bulletin boards, they're saying that we can do simple sharing of information and ideas and viewpoints through this, planning, brainstorm, and recognizing others, and socializing, both in these arenas in the low part. And then when we get over to this higher level of communication, then the instant messaging and the teleconference, they're saying you can do evaluations. You know, you can start into evaluating options and making judgment and having conversations about that. And this is without the visual aspect. This is just audio, right? And then we go into the more complex areas, and they're talking about building consensus, product development, solving problems and making decisions. This is all very high-end problem solving, and this is all can all be done with video conferencing and collaborative software in high-performance virtual teams. And they've been doing this for some time now. Now, what they do is, instead of saying here, build a trust with the face-to-face, like I mentioned earlier, companies that need to build trust first, they're saying face-to-face, you're only going there to socialize, maybe to resolve escalating issues where you need to now come in and get people grounded. So this is an escalation aspect rather than building trust and getting the team to set up and be successful. And then also the socializing. So that's very different. It's a very different outcome that they're suggesting with the face-to-face. That's a bigger change. That's a huge change from where we had started with the virtual teams. And the same could be done with eAuditing. Now, another unsuspecting partner in this is this new standard. And I just really think this new standard is just really awesome. I really do. Because I went to Lori Hunt's discussion on this when it was first coming out. And what struck me was her first part when she said that the ISO 9001-2015 standard, it was written for a company 10 years in the future. Thinking of a company in 10 years in the future and what that company is going to be looking like, right? Because this standard has to last for that time frame because they rewrite these every 7 years, right? But this one has to last thinking 10 years out from now. And with the technology growth that we have witnessed, which I showed you earlier, we've had that smartphone with conferencing for 5 years now. This 10 years is going to be even more technological advancements to streamline and become more efficient and more effective for companies all over the world to work together to produce high quality products. And so when we think about that, e-auditing is just right in here as a solution. Let's think about, and we're going to address some of these things. What the ISO 9001-2015 does is it addresses the future needs of the business. So the context of the organization, and we're going to go through this, I'll give you an example of this, really spells this out as far as the aspects of the organization and how it's made up and how the internal audit now is changing and will be evolving to monitor the extent of the context of that organization. Of course, we have the increased focus on the customer satisfaction, which is paramount here, and more flexibility around the documentation. So this leads into more of the online solutions as well. All right, so we have the online records versus the hard copies. And then having the quality policy statement aligned with company strategies. This is going back to that context of the organization and making this bigger and a broader aspect for internal audits as well as external audits to verify these things. Our internal and external parties that supplement these core competent supply chains, the continued rate of outsourcing, risk-based thinking, and auditing these global supply chains. Boots on the ground audits do not meet the need of these complex supply chains. They can't meet the need of it because it can be physically impossible for some of these audits to occur in some of these locations in the time that they need to occur. And so, here's that question I asked at the very beginning. Does the audit method matter? Here's a clue. Let's take a look at a fictitious company and look at what this company is doing, and then take a look at the type of auditing methods that may be needed here. So ABC Battery Design Company is a small company located in Podunk, Idaho, and what they are doing is they are designing batteries, right? That's all they do is they design and then they wrap it up for distribution. So they are, their scope is, they're very good at design. They can prototype these things, and they'll manage the supply chain for these small and large format batteries, right? And so essentially their organization, they're really focused around design. They could they're very good at selecting strategic suppliers, and then prototyping the release of their product lines to the contract manufacturers, and then managing those releases as well as those contract manufacturers with their quality review, and then the ongoing supply chain management with those companies. So what does that organization look like? And what is the context of that organization? So if we take a look at the context of the organization and use the SWOT analysis, which is recommended actually in the standard, is to begin understanding the context of the organization with a SWOT analysis. This company, its strengths lie in its research and development and its expertise in cell and battery packet formulas, and its technology that it uses, superior brand name, all of these things. And it's gotten pretty good at working virtually because, well, they're in Idaho and nobody goes there, right? But everything else is outside of Idaho there. And I'm from Idaho, so I can say that, right? Anyway, the weakness is the manufacturing internal audits or international supply chains and regulatory requirements. These are not something that's part of their core competencies. So they're going to probably have to outsource that to companies that this is their core competencies. So then we go into looking at that and examining this a little bit further. And so with their strengths, their internal parties is their management, their workforce, their procurement, and their design engineering. They want to keep to the lead of these people. So this is their interested parties here. And if we take a look over here with their external parties, these will be their interested external parties, the customers, the OEMs of the cells. They have some partners with different aspects of the PC board, probably the other parts of the batteries as well. All right, so this is giving us a pretty good picture of the complexity of this organization. However, it is pretty small, right? It's only got like 10 people working at this company. So, all right, so what are some of the opportunities and threats that are involved with this company? Well, the threats are definite. You know, we're experiencing lots of battery problems with skateboards and some of those e-cigarettes and that type of thing, you know, with safety hazards and fires and explosions. But we have, you know, some of the other threats that we have is the external providers, perhaps lack of process controls, or making changes within those batteries, you know, in the manufacturing. Did you know that batteries are tested for safety, but if there's process changes, they're supposed to report that and have those batteries tested again at a third-party location. But that's pretty hard to manage and track unless you're right on it. So what are the risks there? They're high, very high. But here's the opportunity that this little company has is it's got a new market expansion, right? It makes a formatted battery that will fit in many different types of product, right? So it's got a wide product application, and it's introducing new technologies. So, you know, smaller, more powerful format battery, and then the bigger format will go into cars and other uses. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So this would be lining up with their risk-based thinking, right? So let's take a look at what the audit, or let's take a look at the supply chain that we're talking about for this little company. So the supply chain starts out with their cell manufacturer, their PCA manufacturer, the boards, associated, and the casing that goes around the battery. That's a critical aspect. And then the contract manufacturers that they have. All right, so this company is setting up these companies as well as these companies and monitoring the release of their products with these groups. And they have to monitor really the quality that these groups are providing to, you know, to these wholesalers. Oh, and this is a whole other group in their supply chain, is selecting the wholesalers and ensuring that these retailers are doing the due diligence, not promising more than what the battery can offer, those types of things. And then you have all these customers. So your goal here is to get the customer feedback through these groups, that you understand it so that you can push this back into your lab to create better product, right? So this supply chain goes both directions. It's going this direction, and then it's coming back this direction, and you're in the middle. ABC Battery Design Company is in the middle, and it needs to own its supply chain. Now, if it does, its audit plan is going to be very different than what we've seen in the past with internal audits now, isn't it? And it should be, because the new standard is really calling out a change in internal audits to be more of a management audit plan, right? Because it's going to have to cover much more than just what's at your one location. It's going to cover all aspects of your global supply chain, because that is part of your product design. So if we take a look at this new table and look at all the different methods that you could use to report back to you how the quality of your quality system is, then eAuditing is going to be at the core of this to give you faster information about the global supply chain that you're working. Okay, so here we have the audit types: conformance, performance, risk, opportunity, and supplier, right? Because we have to look at all of these things now with this new standard. And then if we look at the methods that we would use, face-to-face, e-audits, reviews, test results, these are all feedback that the ABC battery design can get through the e-audit process, as well as regular information coming back from those suppliers. So, for instance, with the e-audit, you can do the conformance audit. You could also do a performance review using e-audits for a lean supply chain. You could do a performance review that way. When setting up the conformance audits with suppliers, you're going to have to get that into your contracting, right? So that you can use mobile devices, you can use the technology on those locations to be able to conduct these audits in the time frame that you want to and that you need to. So these are all tools that you can have and set up, and you're going to need your purchasing people, your procurement people to get that set up. So now they're part of this audit planning matrix. And here you're going to have your quality folks, right? But over here, when you start taking a look at the test results and maybe getting test results coming back into your organization, like product testing, inspection results from suppliers or the contract manufacturers, you're going to want those coming in. So you're going to now have engineering looking at the results of this, or maybe your quality people. Regulatory testing to ensure the risks and opportunities are resolved here. So here's a few of the testing that would cover both the small and the large format batteries. And then inspection and test results with the supplier. So these are all tools to be used. So when we take a look at the summary message, considering the context of the organization, risk-based thinking, and interested parties, the internal audit process will require more tools and skills from internal auditors to adequately audit the QMS. And so if we're requiring this level of expertise from internal audits to really look at the QMS, then we're going to need that from the registration auditors as well. Registration auditors will also need to learn new auditing methods to also understand the customer's processes and conformance to requirements. So this would include eAuditing as a main requirement for registration auditors to be accredited to. Now let's take a look at 5 steps for getting to eAuditing. If you are not using computers and you are starting new, these are 5 really good tips to help get you started. All right. So the foundational aspect of virtual teams, they have 3 important components to help virtual organizations be successful. And you know what? You're in a virtual team if you're driving a car on a highway every day. Because virtual teams are essentially a lot like going down the interstate. They have similar elements, right? We're all going in the same direction, hopefully. And our objective is the same, is to get from point A to point B, wherever point A and point B is. So the team is together going in the same direction. So for us all to survive, you know, we have the training as far as how to drive, how to read signs, and understand all of the exits and the on-ramps and the lights and all of that, the infrastructure of the highway system. So there's training with that, there's licensing for that, there's relicensing for that, there's retesting, there's all of these things that are built into this infrastructure for this team to be successful. The other thing this takes the technology. Our smart cars, I just got a new car, and it does, you put that in cruise control, and it starts to, you know, when the traffic in front of me starts slowing down, so does this car. It's amazing. And when you start leaving a lane, it'll tell you that you're leaving the lane. It's incredible. So the technology continues to advance, just as the technology for eAuditing. It continues to advance. Things get better. Visuals get better. And then lastly is the cooperation. You know, we have to be cooperative when we're driving. It's just the right thing to do, right? Don't follow too close behind. Let somebody into a lane if they need it. You know, the day will be so much better with that cooperation. And the same is true when you're working online with somebody and auditing. And things can be taken wrong immediately in online meetings. And so you have to really understand how to mitigate that to gain that cooperation. So these 3 things pertain to being in a virtual team, in a virtual environment, as well as an eAuditing environment. The cooperation, the infrastructure, and the technology needs to be there. Now, here's the 5 steps for getting started. 1 is to have a management plan. 2, the internet security. Having an audit model, having a hybrid audit model that shows different ways to audit to meet that management audit plan, as we saw before. Auditor training, and then how to get started. Now, what's interesting about this is this is based off of this standard, and it's free on the internet. You just have to Google CAAT, and it's written by ANAB to a registrar as far as the basis of how they can audit virtually. So I took 5 of the bigger points that they were pointing out in this, and I put them in these terms to just get, for just getting started. But you can just Google that, and it will give you the whole thing from ANAB. So let's take a look at the first one, the management plan. So management team has to have an agreement between the parties. Now, we talked a little bit about this with my battery company and having the agreements between your contract manufacturers and your suppliers. So the stakeholders, your interested parties, essentially, customers, supply chain, and suppliers, you need to have agreement between these parties on the standards and the IT security to be able to do this. So there's some bargaining that needs to go on there. The implementation plan for auditing, so having the audit models and sharing that with these people as far as how it's going to happen, or how you would like it to happen. And then mitigate risk-based thinking and policies in that supply chain. So setting up those audit plans, both in test reports, the different kinds of auditing methods, and getting the feedback from those organizations. Okay. So the second one is internet security. And this is just some high level, this is good practice to do. Never use that free public highway or Wi-Fi when auditing, because it's just not safe. Only use, if possible, the company's password protected Wi-Fi, if you're able to do that. Another solution would be to use collaborative programs like what we're using today, but that offers security in their portfolio, that they do have secure systems. All right, so do that. The other one is, of course, not to use Wi-Fi and just go back to hardwire internet connections where possible. That's the ultimate safety. And use replica. I talked about that with the collaborative rooms. VPN. That might be a VPN will work for moving documents from one point to the other point. And then, of course, make sure all the virus protection is current. So these are very easy to do and to get started. Now, the hybrid models I talked about is when you're planning your audit matrix, here are the three things that you can use. The eAudit for both the online record review and also process review. You can interview people out on the line in their areas. And also, you can have a desk audit. When I talk about the desk audit, and I was talking about the test results and that type of thing, this is where you're getting regular documents in from that global supply chain, and you're reviewing that data to ensure that their records are correct, right? That the yields are acting the way you want them to. Maybe you've got the third-party audit or testing that's going on, and you're looking at that, comparing it with some of the data that they're sending you, that type of thing. That's the type of desk audit that I'm talking about, that they're sending you this information on a regular basis, and you're reviewing it as part of your quality system. And then, of course, we have the site audit that would be done with the process review and review of hard copies or online review copies. Now, these methods within the year or within a 3-year time frame can be rotated, right? You can rotate these things based on what works best for the company. But then if there's an escalation, then you're going to probably do the site audit and adjust everything accordingly. But you can flex this, and it's more efficient and more effective for the company to find and understand the current status of their supply chain quickly and more efficiently and more real time than if somebody was on the road hammering out onto online or on-site audits. The other thing that happens with e-audits is you get good at using the technology and get comfortable with using the technology, then you're going to start picking up other uses for it, like follow up on audits or follow up on new documentation that's being put out there, or maybe follow up on new code that's been sent to remote locations and making sure that it's been downloaded and verified that the testing is the same revision, all of these kinds of things. Verifying those changes. Remember, I talked about the manufacturing, contract manufacturer can make a change in their process, and then that would incite a new testing for the battery. And, this is one way to manage that, right? To see if there was any changes to that process before, so that you would ensure that the testing is where you need it to be. All right, the next one is remote location, having the internal audits. If you need to, you can have somebody go at that location that's local. Pull in a local auditor from that location if you need somebody to be there boots on the ground instead of using mobile technology. And then the last one is the reassessment and if there's any issue escalation. So if it's across, the continents, instead of having a 24-hour delay of getting there, at least 24 hours of delay getting there, you can get there immediately virtually and review what's going on with it, whatever the process issue is. So there's several different things that you can do as well as not only just using it for your internal audits. So number 4, we're going to talk a little bit about the auditor training plan. So by far, a requirement should be with the auditing process and the techniques for how to do e-auditing. That is by far a number 1, because it should be addressed on how to deal with the nonverbal communication, how to mitigate, behavior that's not is late coming to the meetings, those kinds of issues. So this process, this training process, will teach you all of that and how to do open meetings and conduct the virtual audit. Also, in this training, communication for the virtual team. So like I mentioned, the nonverbal communication, but how to leverage the best of your time with the online. This is the only time you're going to have the synchronous time, so not wasting the time with technology issues or fumbling around with things as you're learning to use the technology. Make this be practiced up and learn and know how to use these tools. And then also the learning styles of the individuals, how to ensure that most people that are visual learners are able to understand things in the visual environment. So all of these things impact that virtual audit. The other part of this internal the auditor training is the internal auditing, how to facilitate an audit in either face-to-face or online. So here again, going back to the experience of facilitating a virtual meeting and being able to problem solve and using that so that the technology doesn't impair you from working out that issue. The preparation that's involved with the internal and registration audits really when it's virtual. There's more preparation work, or there's different preparation work than there would be with a face-to-face. So getting that done ahead of time. Using the standard audit process for collecting data so that the audit process is validated, right? And then decide on really what the best model is in that you're going to be using. The virtual, the face-to-face, or if you're just going to do a desk audit. Some of the other types of training with the vast array of how companies are deployed now really leads to auditors taking other types of classes that the ASQ, actually, American Society for Quality, offers for certification. Of course, they have the certified quality auditor training, but it needs to really expand to cover more than just the body of knowledge. It needs to expand in discovering the different types of communication methods in the remote and face-to-face audits, how to conduct the e-audit, explore auditing for risk and performance audits, as well as the changes to the ISO 9001-2015. This standard here, or this training here, the certified quality inspector or inspector associate, has these elements that are really beneficial to some of the internal auditors as well, and that is to look at the customer satisfaction concepts applied to it. That's Certified Quality Improvement Associate, that's what that is. Apply the PDCA 7 tools in the problem solving, lean concepts for manufacturing and office, how it applies to office, and learn supplier management tools. So this certification also gives auditors a bigger breadth of the more broad aspects of the new the QMS standard, but also it answers to some of the issues with the global supply chain audit trail. Now, to get started, you need to start doing some of this. So one, get training so you can get the basics down in the infrastructure, right? And then start practicing. And so, if you're working in a group environment, then what I would suggest is you start facilitating your meetings online, right? So have a staff meeting and meet online. Even if you're all in the same building, meet online and use different tools. This is a daisy diagram, and I actually wrote a white paper on this, Successful Online Meetings on the info line in 2009, on how to brainstorm online meetings and the different aspects of this. I've used this with different teams, and the brainstorming, because there's another 8 squares around each square with brainstorming. And the team that I worked with, one of the teams that I worked with on this, they actually got more ideas virtually doing just a 2-minute brainstorm online. Everybody's typing in these different boxes than they would have if they'd been face-to-face because of the dynamics, because they'd all worked together for so long. And so they had a better outcome with the brainstorming, and then they had an even better outcome with the results because they were able to take leadership roles individually instead of 1 or 2 dominating. And so they did. They were very happy with this. So this is a real live experience with this diagram. So if you were to get into this group and do brainstorming and use tools like this, then you start with that interactive in the virtual environment. And this is where you really start to understand how to use technology and also not let technology get in your way of problem solving. Because, a lot of people they just have this adversity to technology and are very uncertain with that. And the only way to get over that is to use it. Okay, so do this with staff meetings, do this with problem solving, improvement teams. Team up with somebody that is a little more experienced with online auditing and, practice that up and then start getting on your feet after you've taken that training. All right, so some of the benefits that we have here is to understand the virtual communication systems and issues that are affecting quality management systems. And these are when you've got these distance locations, right? They're able to resolve their supply chain issues because you're auditing in the same environment in which they're working. So that means a lot, right? Instead of from just the boots on the ground, because you're not seeing the bigger picture and the experience. You're not experiencing what they're experiencing. The other one is that remote auditing reduces costs. It saves so much time. So if you're on the road a lot, you will see how much time you have back in your calendar from not having to travel. It is just amazing. I'm of the mindset that travel is just a waste of time at this point. Most of the time it is. Okay. So, and then also it's a socially responsible alternative. You're not having to leave, and your footprint is a little less on the global scale there. All right. And then also, I want to answer that question that I asked at the very beginning, and that is that the virtual auditing, it does address canceled audits due to the audit method, right? Because oftentimes supplier audits are canceled because of budget constraints and no travel is set up. And so you have to cancel those audits. And so if you're able to do those audits virtually, you've got the infrastructure set up so that you can do that virtually, then you're able to go on with that audit. So at the very end here, does it matter? Yes, it matters. It matters greatly. And it ensures that the audit will occur according to plan. You'll be able to review those processes instantly in those far-flung locations. You'll see what's going on now instead of what now it looks like 24, 48 hours later. And you'll learn, and you'll learn about the working environment, especially the registration auditors. You'll learn about their working environment if you do it as well. You'll have more questions about how they're getting their information if you do that. That's a tip. All right, so what we talked about today was we talked about driving forces, what's leading us to eAuditing. I applied the context of the organization to an internal audit plan, or actually the management matrix, audit matrix. We talked about minimum auditor training needs, and it goes beyond just learning how to audit, but it also includes tools of how to resolve issues on personality levels, as well as learning and ensuring you know about other kinds of processes like supplier management, you know, customer support, and also the problem-solving tools like fishbone diagrams, trend analysis, flow charting, to just name a few basic ones. We talked about the 5 steps of how to get started, the management plan, getting it set up so that everything can flow evenly when you're having to go to remote locations. The security, internet security, the different methods that you could use for auditing, the training, and how to get started with practicing in your own internal and your own staff meetings. So I am Shauna Wilson, and thank you for joining this webinar. Okay.